Hey everyone, I'm waiting for Mouse to join me. So I'm just letting people um join this second time I do a live. Some kind of I think Mouse is arriving. Okay, cool. So Mouse is one of Hey man,
Hey, how's it going?
how's it going, Mouse?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very well. I was trying to tell the viewers who you are. Well,
Um,
you're
so
one of our tattooists.
my name's Michael, but everyone calls me Mouse. I
Do you
work.
know what? I think this morning I was like, fuck, what's his actual name?
Yeah, I get this so much. I get this really bad.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Um,
Wait,
but yeah,
wait, 1 second. Keep going. Je suis en train de faire quelque chose, mon amour. You can keep going. I'm just my daughter's crashing.
classic.
Ouais, c'est Mouse. Tu l'as déjà rencontré? Oui, oui. Ok, Olympe, il faut me laisser, mon amour. Je suis occupé.
Very sweet. Yes.
So, yeah, and you've been tattooing with us for a little while, for what, about
It's been
six
it's been
months or a year, kind
it's
of
been about a year
officially, and
now.
then
Yeah.
before that, you were with you sort of were around Frank when he was.
Yeah, so I've been tattooing professionally for about a year now. And then before that, I was an apprentice for about 2 years, 2.5 years with Frank Carter, which was kind of at Sang Bleu for a while at the beginning. Maybe for about a year, and then he kind of stopped tattooing so much, and from there it was just wherever he was tattooing in the world, which was usually in like hotel rooms and things, which is kind of unusual, but it was a fun way of learning for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I guess we're doing a bit of a interview format now. So there's a lot of stuff I do know, but we'll just
Mhm.
go through those for the people watching.
For sure.
Um, and so I just wanted to sort of go through a kind of past, present, future kind of thing. I think it's really interesting, in particular, to like for me, it's especially interesting to talk to young tattooists as I think that the tattoo industry is changes so fast, and especially has been changing in the past 5 years,
For sure.
maybe
For
to a
sure.
point where even though I consider myself a relatively young tattooist, not by age, but by the fact I've only been tattooing for 10 years, but nonetheless, I think that it's very interesting to see people who will be reaching their sort of peak probably in the next 10 years, not peaking today, what they think they will be facing, how, I mean, obviously how they got where we are, what they will be facing or think they'll be facing, and where they hope that the tattoo industry and the tattoo culture will get. So that's kind of that was what I think we were interested to talk about, and I wanted to also shout out my friend Basil, aka Zilba One, who's a old friend and tattooist in Switzerland, who also suggested to do a certain amount of to also talk to tattooists about the way they come up with their designs and what it means, and kind of hopefully educating a little bit tattooists, not tattooists actually, people who aren't tattooists, about on how do tattoo designs come to be, and what is what is how, like, why does tattoo iconography look the way it does,
Mm.
what is possible, isn't possible, not really from a technical point of view, but what is a flash design, how do we you know, appropriate, learn the iconography and what it means, and pass it, you know, pass it on, pass it down, etc. So I think transmission is very important, because it works very unlike, I mean, the way it works in the tattoo industry is completely different from most of the so yeah, I think it'd be interesting, maybe in a, you know, about the sort of past and how you got, I mean, it's that basic question, but it's always very interesting, because how the tattoo industry is probably one of the most diverse in terms of the different types of profiles of people who come to the tattoo industry, and the different ways people get to that, to like making that decision, which is a weird decision to make. I mean, it's a highly uncertain, weird, you know, kind of strange choice to get to saying like, hey, I'll be a tattooist now. That's what I'm going to be. There's no diploma, etc. So how does someone, and how did you get to the point where like, yeah, that's it?
Well, I always thought it was kind of a strange thing to get into, and I remember as a kid seeing like loads and loads of my parents don't like tattooing. They're really not into it. It's same as like my entire family, but they have a lot of friends. I remember growing up and seeing them like in the summer, like having barbecues and stuff with like huge sleeves and massive. I remember one of my parents' friends had like a massive totem pole up his back, and as a kid, it was like, whoa! Like I can't believe you could do that as a job. It's like putting an image on someone, and it was always something that I was super interested in growing.
Where was that? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up just outside London in the countryside in a place called Buckinghamshire. It sounds posh. It's just not. It's just like
Right.
classic Midsummer Murders type scenery. It's shit, but it's nice. But it's super kind of like classic England. You know, it's not. There's nothing kind of there's nothing particularly interesting about it. But I think it was, yeah. Growing up, I kind of I'd see tattoos a lot, but not really understand kind of the iconography behind it, and like the artistry that could go into it. And then kind of growing up, I remember Instagram came about, and I was really quickly on Instagram, like I think most people were at my age. I'm 21 now. I think I was like 15 or 16 maybe when it first came about, maybe even younger. And it was at that point that I started seeing tattooing as being like this huge kind of, almost like basically like a medium of being able to, you know, you could do your drawings, but you could make a living off of that by putting it on someone. So it was kind of unusual. I think you've cut out a little.
So sorry, I think my I think Wi-Fi in London is breaking down because of everybody's streaming. So I just got on.
Oh, okay, for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your first memory to, like, the first time you remember being like, you know, seeing a tattoo on someone and be like, that's sick, like, you know?
Probably. That's difficult. I think it's like I hear it all the time from like loads of other tattooers, but and people my age as well that are into tattooing. But it was probably seeing like old kind of 80s films, like From Dusk Till Dawn, and like these, like, you know, these old martial arts films where you see guys with dragons up their arm, or like Crazy Tribal, and just thinking like, oh man, like that's what a tattoo is. And it obviously that changes over time as you get older, but that was definitely kind of what solidified my idea of tattooing growing up, was these like crazy tribal pieces and big dragons and flowers and stuff, you know, which is, I think, pretty standard.
Yeah. No, I mean, for sure. I mean, whatever. Yeah, I think for all kind of era, there's specific things. There was, for me, I think it was that movie. I don't remember. Was it Cape Fear? No, not Cape Fear. That was a series, wasn't it? That the movie with Al Pacino. No, sorry, De Niro, who has that incredible sort of the back piece with the
Oh, it's like a crazy Kremlin or something, right? Or something
what?
like it's like a big like Russian Kremlin or something like that. No,
No, it's a scale, I think. And
oh, okay, yes, yeah,
you know the one.
Yeah, it's like kind of that gnarly prison looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, for me, it wasn't the first time I saw a tattoo, but that definitely, you know, was the sort of important moment. There were a couple of singers as well. I think we all have like these things that sort of seal, like, sort of represent kind of heavily for a certain generation. And then how did you get into the oh, thanks. Someone's confirming it was Kate Fay. Thank you.
Nice.
So, how then did you get into, well, arts in general? I mean, what was the path to being like, yeah, tattooing now?
Honestly, like for a long time growing up, all I wanted to be was like I wanted to be a scientist or like a marine biologist. 'Cause as a kid, I was always
That's cool.
taking stuff apart, reading like books on how babies are born and like how frogs grow and
It's
shit.
called porn, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Early stages of porn, but no, and then I always drew. Like it was the only thing I was like actually good at. I think. I mean, I thought I was good at it. I mean, I hope I am. But well, that's pretty much all I did my whole life. Like every stage in my life so far, I just remember I've always been drawing ever since I was a kid, and I got to an age where I started to see I'd start to see people like yourself, like Duncan X, Liam Sparks, all these people drawing these things that I loved growing up. You know, like religious iconography, the sort of thing I'd see at church when my parents you would take me as a kid, like begrudgingly. I didn't enjoy it at all, but like these like crazy images, and it was kind of that combined with the sort of thing I'd see in books growing up, like knights and frogs being cut open, and that was kind of the point where I was like, oh, I could actually draw this stuff, and it would be cool, you know, like it's
Right.
just you when you're a teenager, you're like, oh, knights and skulls is not cool anymore, and then I got into tattooing, and I was like, knights and skulls are cool as fuck, like
Yeah,
they make great tattoos. So yeah, I think that to answer your question, but yeah, I've always drawn. That's pretty much been forever.
cool. And then, so what kind of platform, what kind of media did you start seeing tattoos on and tattooists, like the work of tattooists?
It was almost entirely Instagram.
Right.
I mean, other than seeing it like like out on the streets and like my family friends and things, it was almost absolutely entirely Instagram that I would see tattoo stuff on. Like I remember a point when I was growing up and I couldn't afford an iPhone, so I'd use Instagram like browser
Right.
on my computer, and I'd be like looking at tattoo designs and like trying to draw stuff out, and but it was always Instagram where I'd see people's work, because I think that's just a sign of like the time that I grew up in. You know, Instagram was where everyone kind of flocked to with tattooing, I think.
Interesting. And one thing that I'm quite curious about as well is, did you have the feeling that did you get the feeling when you started seeing, you know, that kind of work, that especially the themes and that you're talking about, did you immediately get the feeling that it was a style, that it was a sort of coherent thing, or did you just see different people doing things that you were drawn to, that, yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, did you feel that it was something more quite coherent, and yeah, do you see what I'm saying?
I could see like immediately, I could see like definitive styles. Like I
Right.
could see like when someone was doing traditional, and I could see when someone was doing like, you know, something like neo trad, or like kind of like those medieval engravings kind of style stuff. Like I could identify that really quickly and see that people would have like their own style. And I think
Right.
that was a really important thing for me, because growing up, I think to the layman, when you're looking at tattooing, people kind of just see it as people walking into a shop and getting whatever. They don't realize that there's an artistry to it, and people have like styles. So
Right.
when I realized that growing up, I was like, oh fuck, okay. So you can take what you're interested in, and
Mhm.
kind of channel that into tattooing.
Did you get a feeling that so once you started seeing the work itself, did you start sort of following, or trying to, did you get a sense of a sort of community and a certain amount of people who were sort of specifically doing that kind of style, these kinds of illustrations and themes and style that you liked, or did you think that it was just you know, just a group of people not necessarily related to each other? Like when, at what point did you get a feeling that there was actually a sort of coherent group of people doing that kind of work?
I think, to be honest with you, I remember, I don't know whether I ever felt like there was like a whole community, because quite quickly being in like big kind of like introducing myself to tattooing
Mm-hmm.
via Instagram, like I'd see like I could see communities of tattooers that knew one another and would interact with one another and do a similar kind of style of work sometimes, but also like I think I very quickly saw how cutthroat it was. You know, like I'd see a lot of people kind of really quick to defend their work and say that they were the first person to do something, or the first person to, you know, draw a certain way or tattoo a certain thing. And I saw that quite quick and was like, oh, maybe, you know, I remember very early on seeing that tattooing had like a super kind of territorial element to it as well. Like,
Right.
and I was only like, I remember being only 14 or 15 and quickly realizing like, oh, you know, tattooers seem to be like really kind of defensive of their work, which I don't think, I think it's kind of an endearing quality of the whole thing for sure.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that will be, that might be also a bit of a conversation for later in this interview, because I think that there's a reason why, there's a sort of evolutionary reason. I mean, within the evolution of tattooing, there's an evolutionary reason why people are protective, and a lot of reasons why there is this sort of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, in my opinion, reasons why it's not necessarily as important today, and it might even evolve in the future to be a bit different. So I think it's interesting that you perceived it that way, because I definitely did as well when I got into tattooing. Well, over 10 years ago, over 20 years ago now, not tattooing myself, but started getting interested in tattooing, first as sort of passively, then actively. But that, so I think that's really interesting, and I think the way it's evolving, in particular with the with that kind of sense of territoriality, and that these kinds of sort of old schoolness in the tattoo world. Some elements are extremely important. Some might actually just go progressively disappear, and already have disappeared. I think to a large extent, there's some things that in even in the past 2 to 3 years, I've sort of completely adjusted the way I deal with certain aspects. Anyway, we'll probably get to that. And I think there's and I was about to ask another question, and actually ties in with a comment that I see right now about Guy, because I wanted to ask you as well, to what extent did you get a sense, or at what point did you get a sense of how did that style originate, the kind of, you know, quote unquote black work style? I don't like this term, but for the lack of better term, because what I find really interesting, and that's also one sort of understand one thing I'm underlying my questions, is that you probably got into that kind of style as it sort of just was beginning, and you saw as it had just started to be a coherent thing. And before that, it wasn't. I mean, it was not a style, it was not a thing up until 10 years at most, at very most, 10 years ago. It started being a style, but maybe even less than that. But I would say about 10 years now is when it started being a style. But I could say maybe even 5, 6, 7 years. And there were a few people before me doing that, who actually were doing that quite separately. the sort of typical elements of what constitute the style, that style today, were sort of brought together by one individual, in my opinion, in particular, Thomas Hooper, who really sort of created the blueprint of what black work is, by taking and Duncan X, all the a lot of people from the Into You sort of origin. I think Into You as a whole is sort of one very important element of that creation, with the people within. So Thomas, Zed at some point, and people who've been through that, and then you have a couple more people, and I remember seeing the Yvonne of Bluton Eisen, who today is actually Duncan X's girlfriend, who was one of the first people that I saw doing engraving style, kind of engraving looking kind of things, and even Frank, actually, who in spite of doing, Frank is an incredibly prolific tattooist, and it has this sort of something that I always extremely respected in him, which is that he's not a stylist. He just is a straight up tattooist.
Yeah,
He just
sure.
tattoos, and he's an incredible, draftsman. He's an incredible painter. He's an incredible artist, that he can take anything and just turn it into a tattoo. And I remember seeing him use those Dover books while he worked at Frith Street Tattoo. That was a long time ago, way before I was tattooed myself. And see him just redo some sort of sorcery or kinds of things like that, and sort of in that sort of black work kind of style. And I remember seeing that and thinking that was amazing. And Thomas Hooper was already someone I really looked up to. Anyway, but that's really interesting, because I think it's really within maybe 3 or 4 years, once I started tattooing, being a tattooist myself, not because of myself in particular, but myself and a group of people, among which Guy Le Tattoo as well, that black work sort of really became a thing, and that people were sort of all referencing the same things in a coherent manner, and then went to create their own styles. Anyway, so it's a long little digression to explain as well. But I thought, so what is your perception of the genesis of that style? Like, what was your perception?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting, because when I first got into tattooing, it was the only thing I remember really vividly following as many different styles of tattoo as I could, because I was obsessed with the variety and skill involved in like every type of tattooing. I think originally I was very much into kind of the traditional side of things, and to the point of like I've always been quite obsessive with whatever I do. So I remember getting into traditional tattooing and really kind of like wanting to know the roots of it and who does what now, especially in like London, because I was getting to an age where I wanted to go get tattooed. And so when it came to the engraving stuff, it was kind of strange, because that kind of like engraving, or like black work, as some people call it, like I was almost into that before I was traditional, because it has such quite like a strong illustrative element to it. And I don't know, I never really followed so much of like a genesis or a progression of it, because it wasn't really how I ended up kind of getting interested in it. I remember before I was an apprentice to Frank, I'd watch interviews with him, and he'd talk about Thomas Hooper, and obviously I'd go and look at Thomas Hooper's work, and that was like a real strong point of inspiration for me. I think for a lot of people, mind you, and then yourself and Duncan X as well. But it wasn't, I don't think I ever looked at the kind of progression of how that style came about, as much as I did try to appreciate how people approach it differently.
Right.
I think that was more something that I focused on, because people I'd see, I remember there was points where I'd see people kind of, they tattoo something like an old Holbein engraving,
Yeah.
and I'd be like, oh, that's so weird, I've just seen that person tattoo that. And then it would click with me that it was, you know, they were all copying the same reference material, but the way that they could do it in such a breadth of like different styles, but all kind of in this same kind of like culture of like the illustrative tattooing was really interesting to me, because I thought that was only really something that happened within traditional tattooing, and I never
Right.
really like fully clicked with traditional tattooing, you know, like I never felt like I was the kind of person that would get loads of like anchors and,
Right. Right.
you know, roses and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that answers your question. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So how did you meet Frank? And can you tell us a bit about the apprenticeship? And I want to say, like, also just briefly to kind of, for me, it's really interesting because as much as always these you know in the tattoo industry, there's always like yeah permanently debates on apprenticing, not apprenticing, blah blah, what it is, what is good tattooing, what isn't. Um, you know, the one thing I'll always tell to anyone, especially people who want to learn, people who are learning or whatever, is that to me, tattooing is. I fell in love with tattooing just way before I saw a good tattoo. I saw mostly bad tattoos, and I
Yeah.
still fell in love with it. And I fell in love with what I understood of that lifestyle, what I understood of everything that came with it. And I want to just briefly mention as well that very interesting book that came out recently about Felix Le, where he tells about what the book tells about how he got into tattooing. So Philippe Leu's father, and I thought that was really interesting because for me, as much as there's reasons why we want to be like, you know, enforce a certain level of tattooing and say like, look, you have to aim like as high as you can and really, you know, and have your references and learn from the right people and learn the right way and this and that. But really, still, I think that the beauty of tattooing is that you can learn anyway, and that a big part of the aura that tattooing has is this sort of that sort of slightly bohemian, you know, bohem kind of thing about it, and that is still real, or it can be real to some extent if you want it, and I definitely had, you know, my fair share of it. um and what I so now looping in, sort of circling back to you, what I find interesting is that what the experience you had tattooing on the road with Frank in his tour bus and things like this, and I don't want to spoil it too much yet, but I think to me is so quintessentially tattooing, as well as someone who would just like, you know, just clean, just mop the floor of a shop for 2 years before they can even start drawing something. Like it just qualifies just as much, and in many ways I think it's amazing that you also can get to be a emancipated tattooist that way. And I think it's important to say to keep insisting on that diversity of ways you can get into tattooing that are what makes tattooing today so amazing, and has always made it so amazing, but still amazing to this day. So can you tell us a little bit about the beginning, the middle, and the end of the apprenticeship?
It's I get asked it, I mean I get asked this quite a lot, which is I find really strange, but it was kind of weird. Me and Frank live near one another. We did, and I had a Saturday job when I was like, I think when I was like 17, working in I was working in a Waitrose. Worst job ever, so bad. But you know, you do what you
Hey
got to do.
BJ, sorry, just shouting out BJ Betts. Just
All good. Yeah. Anyway, I was working there, and I was a fan of Frank's, like not like to a huge extent, but I knew he would come to the shop. And anyway, one day I met him and said hi. I did all the classic stuff, you know, as you do. like said hello.
Groupie out on him.
Yeah, fully. And then, but about a year later, I couldn't find an apprenticeship anywhere because it became quite apparent to me how saturated it was becoming trying to get into tattooing. And I literally just sent him I sent him a message. Yeah, nice one. Thank you for that, Frank. Thanks for the phone. I didn't. But yeah, I dropped him a message, and long story short, I asked for an apprenticeship, and he very, very kindly offered to give me one, which was insane, and still was like insanely jealous. I love you too. Thank you.
Funny how you should stop talking shit as soon as Frank shows up and
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, but I think I didn't have a normal apprenticeship in the slightest, you know, like from the get-go. I was doing a lot of kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but I'd be doing all sorts of things. Like I'd be driving Frank to places. I'd be, you know, carrying all his luggage on tour. That I'd try and make his days easier by like getting him his food, making him food. And then I'd be doing the normal stuff like setting up and breaking down in hotel rooms and things, which I learned at Sang Bleu for like about 6 months to a year beforehand. And I think Frank like really quickly acknowledged that I wasn't doing the kind of tasks that a normal apprenticeship would involve, you know. So as a result, for a long time, well, for my entire apprenticeship, I was paid, which was amazing and insanely rare as well for a tattoo apprentice to get that, which is nuts. Like it still amazes me today. Like I was able to have that opportunity. But I think that came from a position of Frank realizing that I was doing these jobs that maybe you wouldn't do in a normal apprenticeship, and there was a lot of tasks that I'd be set that I think you wouldn't have to do in like 4 years of working in a London shop, you know, like getting up at 6 a.m. in Norway trying to find somewhere that sells cling film.
Nice.
Because no one speaks English. Like it's a crazy thing, and it's amazing that I got to do that opportunity. But I think Frank acknowledged that was something that like he was generous enough to pay me for doing these things, which I think is insane. But also like I see a lot of people criticizing people for offering to do that. You know, I see it as like a young tattooer, people going for apprenticeships, and people kind of have this like set idea of how an apprenticeship should be.
Yeah. And
I never like, I fully respect that and understand that it's always been like that. But I also at the same time, it seems to me that it's obvious as the proprietor of knowledge that you should choose how you kind of go and distribute that. You know, if you want to pay someone to do your laundry and take your dog out for a walk and teach them to tattoo, then by all means do that. But I think you have the right to decide how you share that information. You know, I've heard of like, I think Alex Renke had an apprenticeship for near on something like 10 years or something crazy, you know, and that's,
I mean, Japanese style.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think it's amazing that there's this diversity in learning this like really still quite eclectic skill.
Mm-hmm.
But I do still find it strange, for better or worse, that people have like these set kind of ways that you should pass on that information, you know.
If I may interject here, I think I can tell you why. I think that there's a very specific reason and good reason why.
Oh no, for sure. But I think there is, yeah.
But like, and I'm going to even start by saying, it's not because so let me say it like this. What I'll tell any of my apprentices is, I can teach you only one way to tattoo. I can teach you one way that I know works, which is my way.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one way that I can guarantee, or at least have the highest odds that you will be, you know, able to be a professional, someone who will make your life in tattooing. There are others, and I'm not saying there aren't, but there's one way that I can tell you in my own sort of, you know, take the moral responsibility to say, yeah, like I know that to work. And it's the same on a bigger level when a whole community say, look, there's one way to do it. It doesn't mean that there aren't others. It means that it's the way where the chances that you get what you need to function in the tattoo world are the highest, which is always in any sort of artistic field, the whole, you know, the highway and the sort of sideways, you know, and the sort of self-taught people and etc. And all everything has its own, but there's a reason why people will, you know, try to enforce, say that, you know, that's the way. It's not because there only is one way. It's because that's one way that has, you know, proven to work better than others. It doesn't mean that others don't work. And I will never talk bad about someone who's learned a different way or someone who taught a different way, for the matter. Because if it works, then so be it. And if you find people who are willing to do that, you want to charge to teach the tattoo, you want to pay, you want to do something else, you want to make it 10 years, you want to make it 2 months, whatever. That's the beauty again. And I want to celebrate that diversity and that beauty.
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. I think it's cool that there's these different ways of learning, and I think it's interesting, you know, especially talking to, you know, you hear about apprenticeships from other shops, and it's really nice hearing different ways in which people have learned and kind of gone through this like trial by fire in some cases. And I think it's definitely an endearing part of tattooing as a whole, from my perspective anyway. Like
100%.
I'm an infant in this industry without doubt, but it's cool to see this diversity in such a even just in the process of learning to tattoo.
Absolutely. And I think, and there's another thing as well. I think something that is so quintessential to tattooing as well is that sort of, I mean, there's something extremely contemporary in the sense that it's a very egocentric or ego-centered activity. And I think what is interesting is that it's an oral tradition in the sense that there aren't books, there aren't you know, authorities in the tattoo world who can say that's right or wrong. So that means also that individuals have to become tattooing. You are tattooing. This is like being a tattooist is not something you do, it's something you are. And this is something that from the point you have reached a certain level, and that's, you know, back to Frank. I think someone like Frank, to me, has represented, for as long as I've known him, like, to me, he always did his thing. He stopped tattooing at times to do music or whatever, but to me, he was always so quintessentially tattooing. He was tattoo himself as a person, and anything from that point onwards, anything you do will be right. There's no, you know, but you do need to reach a certain sort of level in the game, you know, sort of big boss level in that game. So anyway, now about the present, how I just wanted to, you know, see a little bit, how do you fill your days, what would you do? And then as I was telling you earlier, like if you have a few drawings or things that you have, we could have
sure.
And maybe you can explain, like, how do you get to such a design? That would be really interesting to hear about your process today, and show us what kind of things you like to do.
Okay, so I suppose it's kind of weird at the moment being in lockdown. It's like really throwing how I normally go about coming up with ideas and drawing things, and I spend a lot of time going to like old museums and like antique shops and things, looking at, you know, the classic kind of way to get it, I think. So I spend a lot of time doing that and like scrolling through the internet. But I'm really fortunate in that a lot of the things I draw are things that I'm like inherently quite interested in anyway, whether it be kind of like medical diagrams or, you know, religious stories, like mythology, botanicals, like all this kind of thing. Like, it's all stuff that I really enjoy reading about. So what I normally do is like I have like a stack of drawings at the moment that I'm trying to like either digitize or turn into some kind of zine, because at the moment they're all over the fucking place. Let me get myself sorted. Sorry. So I have this huge. This is just like a stack of like a bunch of drawings that I have with me during this lockdown, and it's all just kind of like things that I just pieced together.
Hey,
Sheets
Mouse,
slowly.
just 1 second. I see, just 1 second. So, hello. I see people posting questions in the comments. There actually is a little button for a question button, and so I suggest that we actually answer questions towards the end of that we go through questions at the end of the conversation. So anyone who has questions, the best is to not put them in the comments, but put them in the question little thing that just literally just writes to the comment sort of zone field at the bottom of the screen, so that we can, because we can't, we don't necessarily get to see them in the comments. So anyway, go on.
Oh, and actually, to answer one of those questions, yeah, I pretty much always do use reference. I think that was another thing that I learned growing up. Like I always found it quite key to be drawing from something,
Mm-hmm.
It just so happened that it kind of got to the stage where it ended up being stuff like this, which is just basically me just repurposing like old Dura or, Hans Holbein, things like this. But I don't know, there's all kinds of shit in here. Like bugs was always something that I was super interested in growing up, and I go from this, like I draw everything on tracing paper first, because I never got on with an iPad. Like I found it really restrictive, and then it goes to like this kind of thing where
Cool.
I just do everything on paper with pencil and pen. It's like super straightforward, and I never really connected with using an iPad properly. I just found there's too much of a barrier between what I'm doing and like what I'm trying to do, I think. Yeah. Yeah, but my process is like normally just like I'll just be reading something I'm really into and just fall down like this rabbit hole on the internet where like 3 hours later I'm suddenly like reading something about the Egyptians, and then I'm like, oh fuck, I should totally draw something to do with the Egyptians. And
Yeah.
I think it's nice that way, and I think it definitely I think it's from what I've been told, it really shows on Instagram as well, because I end up just having people ask me to tattoo stuff that I am just like genuinely really interested in, fortunately, which is great,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally also, regarding the question of the reference, for me, references, whether things are internalized, if you're a fine artist, a way or another, your perception of form, your perception of what is beautiful is made based on your experience. And if you're producing something that is relevant in a certain cultural context, then it also means that it's not completely left field, it's part of something. So whether they completely internalize, there's codes, visual semantic codes that you're using and sort of abiding by, or at least sort of referring to, just moving. So the question of reference is actually, I think it's a bit of a tricky question, because there's this sort of idea of the genius, like creative genius in arts, and that you make up stuff. But really, that doesn't happen unless you're doing, unless you're in art brut or something, and someone completely disconnected from the world. But coming to tattooing, what I find really important is you are not just producing things by yourself. You're producing something for someone in advance, or why the person, the client, came to you with a request. And so for that reason, having a book or having an exterior, something that you can share with a person, that you will use as a sort of platform to interact, to exchange ideas, and sort of have a frame of reference that is visual, and outside of you, not just words, you're producing something visual. I use books, for example, as like a Rorschach test. I give books to my clients, and I say, okay, what do you like? Just take all these books. I overwhelm them with books. I give them like 20 books, and I'm like, okay, well, of course you don't have the time to go through that in detail. You have to go through all those books very quickly. So let me see what exactly what you stop on, what catches your eye, and then we'll work from there. Because I know these books by heart, so I know exactly, if you point this thing, I'll bring, if you point out 1 or 2 or 5 images, I'll bring you, for each images that you point out, I will give you 5, 10 images that refer to that image, either formally, because of the theme, because of or something else. And then from that, we'll just keep refining, keep narrowing down until we get much closer to the reference that we're going to base ourselves on. And then either way, because it's on a body, because it has to be then adapted to a certain person, we'll always end up so far from the original image anyway. Even if I trace it, even if I try to be as close as possible to the original image, the fact that it is a tattoo will make it completely different. It is a tattoo today versus an illustration from the 17th, 18th century or something. So anyway, I find the idea of the drawing, and that's also regarding the iPad versus iPad has, there's some interesting things. I use both, but I think that drawing, having this sort of thing also helps, this sort of very analog. There's something in tattooing that is everything but digital, everything but virtual, and the sort of very, very material, very analog quality of the process is something that also helps a client or a person that you're working with focus on the right things. Because on an iPad, it looks like you can scale up or scale down or take this. No, you can't. And you need to be very careful to channel the conversation and make sure that that people don't, that you understand the constraints. And when you draw, there's that sort of thing. I mean, Duncan, I've heard some amazing stories. I don't remember if it was Duncan who was saying that. But I vaguely remember Duncan saying something about always showing a design like too big. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what it is, but like there's so much that you can do. Oh, no. I remember. Okay. I remember what Duncan was saying, that he shows not drawings, but a photocopy of the drawing, because it looks like less, it looks more permanent. It doesn't look like you can easily change something. And that sort of spares you, or that limits the amount of like, oh, can you just change the eye a little bit? Can you just change the position of the arm or this or that kind of discussion with the client? Anyway, but that's kind of a joke thing. But I think the idea of channeling the process, especially when you're in a back and forth with a client, is extremely important, extremely interesting. And back to the sort of tracing and reference system, then that is back to the idea of creating this sort of very incremental way tattoo iconography evolves. And the fact that at the end of the day, sure, you can tattoo anything in principle, but in fact, when you see at what actually gets tattooed, is extremely coherent. And that's not because people don't think, because it's not because of technical constraints. It's because it doesn't make sense. And so tattooing is not just anything you want. It also is a word in itself, with certain things that are proven to work and to make sense. Anyway, little digression again, but yeah. And so do you have maybe another finished drawing that you could show, where you could, where there would be an interesting story behind?
Yeah, I think so. Let me have a look. Honestly, like I've been in lockdown with all this like stack of drawings. I told myself, like, all these sketches of where I've just been like, I've thought of something before I've gone to bed, and I've quickly, sketched it up on a piece of tracing paper, and I'm in the process of basically just trying to turn as many of them into sheets of flash as I can. But it's just, when you're in lockdown, you're forced to stay inside, and suddenly you're distracted by 100 things. But I have this sheet here, which is like, it's kind of just a bunch of like animal skulls and flowers and things. But it wasn't really I don't know. I can't. I think I was just. I mean, I've always liked skulls, and obviously, like I think every boy does growing up, especially nowadays. You know, playing video games and heavy metal music and all the stuff, the wonderful stuff that comes along with that. But um, I think yeah, drawing skulls has always been one of those things with tattooing where I've been like, I've always felt quite compelled to. I don't know why. I think, you know, when you grow up around it and you're seeing like Kerry King and Slayer on TV, you're like, oh yeah, skulls is like, that is tattooing. So I definitely like, it's something that I always come back to doing because it's just inherently quite cool, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
same as flowers. So I thought it'd be a cool combination. But um, yeah, I've lost my train of thought now.
So no worries. So what would you do? Like, do you live by yourself?
I actually, I was apprenticing. I've only been like working independently out of an apprenticeship for about a year now. And before that, I was living at home because I was an apprentice. And I didn't need to move out because I lived so close to Frank anyway. You know, it was like he lives 5 minutes down the road from me. There is no point in me moving out. So I spent I spent the last year basically just trying to figure out what I want to do with in terms of moving out, whether London's the city for me. I think it is, fortunately. I mean, I'm working here a year now. I love it. But during this lockdown, fortunately, I've been staying with some friends and but yeah, basically just trying to draw as much as I could. It kind of put a stunt on everything because not to make coronavirus the topic of conversation as always, but it put a stunt on me moving out for sure. But
Right,
but
right.
yeah, no, London's great, and it's especially like it's a great place to be as a tattooer for sure. You know, it
Yeah,
keeps you
I
super
think,
inspired.
yeah, 100%. I think London has become, I mean, in the past 10 years, I mean, I'd put London, you know, up there with New York, which to me always kind of was, but maybe, you know, yeah, I mean, all places go through phases in terms of their, you know, sort of creative impact. But I think London's had a really good run in the past 10 years in terms of tattooing. And I think back to that sort of earlier conversation a bit about, you know, territoriality and how people behave. And I think that it was a bit, I mean, when I arrived in London, it wasn't, you know, cutthroat. It was all in all like, you know, tattooists are mostly, they can sort of pretend to be, you know, hardcore and whatever, but really most of them are nerds and you know, just artists really. So so at the end of the day, we just like, you know, so anyway, but there were you know a lot of those sort of turf sort of beefs and stuff like that. I'm talking about, yeah, 15 years ago. And now, like, even 5 years ago, I remember being extremely like feeling very territorial about, you know, things. And I feel that it is a sort of proof of the amazing uh, progression and success that tattoo industry is having today, um, because because there's so many studios and everyone. I feel that the demand is still growing faster than the offer in the tattoo industry, which means that you can have like 5 studios within a mile radius and not really be stepping on each other's toes. So bar personal issues with you know, with other people, because you know there's always people not, you know, who aren't very nice people. But besides that, there's no need. I think that the tattoo industry is getting to a bit of a, it's sort of going through sort of being more mature now, and where people can focus on much more focus on you know, doing good work and yeah, just focusing on what they do and doing it really well, than you know, worrying too much about this or that person and being a few blocks away from them, which doesn't apply to everywhere, but I think in a place like London it definitely is. um so yeah, so I think maybe on to the last little bits of the conversation, I'm very intrigued to, let's pretend COVID it doesn't really exist. Um,
Okay.
but you know, I'm an optimistic. Optimistic by nature, and I personally think that we'll be okay. And I think we'll be surprised how things go back to normal
Mm.
quick. Maybe not. Maybe that's just what I want to believe, but I do believe. Anyway, so how do you yeah like what do you hope to see? How do you see yourself? How do you picture like your life as a tattooist in the next few years? What do you hope? Like, what do you hope your life to be? Do you want to just travel a lot? Do you want to, go crazy, or do you want to just be the best tattooist? Do you want to get rich? What do you want to do? Like, what's your
Oh, that's
hope?
a hard question. I think, I mean, obviously, I want to be like really on top of what I do, but I found, I mean, especially now, like having more time than ever to sit on social media, I found that it's not so important for me to be like comparing myself to other people at the moment, as it is just trying to perfect what it is I'm trying to do, you know.
Mhm.
And I think I didn't realize until quite recently, as stupid as it sounds, that apparently I have quite like a style to what I do, which is great to hear. But I didn't realize it was so much of a thing for my work. So I think just trying to like solidify that and develop that, but also kind of not get too stuck in just doing one thing. One of the things you mentioned earlier that I feel like was like a really important point was that I always looked up to Frank, especially being very, very like multifaceted in the way that he could tattoo. Like I've seen him draw like full Japanese pieces. I've seen him draw like geometric stuff, engraving stuff, traditional, you name it. I saw him do like a portrait once, which
Hey,
blew
Dave.
my mind, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think trying to work towards that and not get stuck in one thing has always been quite important to me as well. But it's difficult
Mhm.
now because it's like you said, you can have 7 shops in one area in London, but people will go to a shop that they like because they know there's like a particular style there. So I think in some ways it maybe it is becoming a bit harder to be a bit more well-rounded, or maybe it's just that people don't want to be so well-rounded because they can just do one style and get away with it. I don't know, but I think for myself, I'd like to be the best tattooer I can. Like I have like an inherent thirst for like learning as much as I can. And, I think that's, I think it's, I mean, I hope it's a good way of going about tattooing for sure, you know.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think just being the best tattooer I can be, and I'm not a traveler. Like it
Right.
makes me so ill traveling. So I think being in London, trying to be the best tattooer I can be, and just drawing as much as I can, which is pretty much my life anyway. So
Very
I'm not
British of
particularly
you.
interested. Yeah. No, yeah, exactly.
Besides colonizing places, British people, I don't know them to be good, huge travelers.
Yeah,
But
just yeah,
eh,
being polite.
historically, yeah, that's overall. Cool. And yeah, I just wanted to say, like, yeah, I think that for sure, like with an increased amount of demand, of course, there's obviously the more possibility for artists and studios, even cities, to specialize in some given styles. But nonetheless, I feel that over over a whole career, you're talking about, you know, 20, 30 years, maybe more, being an artist, being a tattooist. And I feel that the pressure of delivering is can get pretty high. Like imagine like in your 30s you might have have kids, and all of a sudden your focus won't be anymore in like switching your style all of a sudden and redefining yourself. You want to be able to go and do something, or if you want to switch your style, you have like 2 days to try something new. You don't have 6 months. And I think that trying and sort of covering as much ground as possible early on so that you can switch around when needed and adjust, the things that feel right to yourself, but to your environment, to your clientele, is very crucial. And you might not feel how crucial it is early on. And I think it's the same with technique. Even like I see people doing an extremely, being very good at doing one kind of technique when they tattoo, and that works for a while, but then all of a sudden they realize that they want to do something else, and they're like, oh well, now I have to learn a whole new thing. Do you want to do it early on when you don't have so much pressure, or do you want to be learning the whip shade, or do dot work, or do color packing or whatever, when you're like been tattooing for 15 years and you're like, oh, now I'm gonna kind of try something else. So I think I absolutely agree with you, and I think London has, there's no, there's a huge potential over time. I think London is one of the best places on earth for tattooing, so I think you should be good.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty good. We've been at it for an hour. I think maybe we can have a quick look at the questions and see if you have any more, thoughts or whatever. We talked about the references. I'm looking at the questions now. The pens and materials, I think, I mean, I don't know if you want to reply, but I think you've answered roughly. Zilba is asking a pretty interesting question. How do you find a good, how do you differentiate between a smart and a good design? I think it's actually a very good and a smart question.
Yeah.
And there's the idea of the other question about the cap for starting in the tattoo industry. I'll answer to that one very quickly, because the question is, do you think there is an age cap for starting to get into the tattoo industry? And I'm living proof that there isn't, and there's even like people who started later than I did. But I apprenticed in my late 20s, and I started being a tattoo artist when I was I don't know, I was about to turn 30. So I think it's really important to understand like that there really isn't, as far as I'm concerned. I'll try to make it short, but when people ask me, the thing is, I knew I was into tattooing before, and I feel that I just needed to learn to tattoo, but there's so much that I didn't need, like that I had so much already context and knowledge about, the history and all that, that really it was sort of the last step for me. And I think that there's a lot of, as a tattoo artist, to be a good artist, you essentially, you're essentially, in French you say un orchestre. You're like, you do everything in your trade, more or less. You have a tattoo studios maybe that will help you, but it's not like most other trades where you'll have a lot of people helping you. You might have an agent if you're, a photographer or an artist. You might have a gallery. You might have people. You're a tattooist. You do most of what you do. It's only yourself, and so the actual artistic part, element of if you consider all the things that you need to understand and be able to perform really well to be a good professional tattoo, the actual artistic part is tiny, or it's not tiny, but it's definitely small. And what I'm guessing at is that being more mature and experienced in life in general, and being in particular to handle another person in front of you and be like able to tell that person, like, look, you need this and that, no, we don't do this, or whatever. It's like, it takes a lot. And I feel that age and maturity definitely helps on so many levels in the tattoo industry. And if I'm not mistaken, Duncan X and quite a few people that I know started in their 20s. I think Duncan might even have started in his 30s. So I think, no, the answer is no, there isn't. But I don't think there's a cap at all. And that's one of the beauties of the tattoo industry as well. Now, Mouse, do you want to try and answer Basil's question about a good and a smart tattoo? What do you think? What do you feel the difference is?
Okay. Well, the question was, what makes a good tattoo versus a smart tattoo?
Yes. Can you not see the questions?
No, I think you've got the questions.
Oh, right. Maybe I
Um,
got it. Yeah.
Fuck, that's a really hard question. It's kind of subjective, I think, as well. I think technically, you know, what makes like a technically good tattoo is probably quite different to what makes a smart tattoo. But then what makes a smart tattoo is kind of depends on what your idea of smart is. I think, not to sound like I'm just totally kind of like avoiding that
A
question,
little
but
bit.
I think the way I always put it to people that comment on tattooing that don't really know much about tattooing kind of as a skill is that, you know, anyone could look at this is a terrible analogy, but anyone could look at a chair and be like,
Hey, George.
that's a really nice you know, that's a really nice chair, but they might not like the style of it, you know. But to actually know whether it's a good chair, they'd have to know, you know, presumably they'd have to know carpentry or some kind of like level of manufacturing, you know. And I think that it's a terrible analogy, I'm fully aware, but I think the same goes for tattooing. A lot of people will look at a tattoo and be like, man, that's an awful tattoo, but they may not like the intelligence behind it or like the thinking behind it, so that they'll directly attack as to whether it's like a good tattoo or not. And I think that's kind of where that question, it comes into that question, is that what makes a good tattoo could, you know, you could base it entirely on the technicality of it, I think, you know. But what makes a smart tattoo really comes down to your tastes and what you want to get out of a tattoo. I think, you know, some of the most basic and bold tattoos are, you know, in a way, in a sense, some of the smartest tattoos, because you know how they're gonna, you have a rough idea of how they're gonna always, you know, look after 10 years. And they are what they are. There's no nuance to it. They are, you know, it is an image of a swallow. It is an image of a panther. And I think that's sick. I think that's really smart. But I think a lot of people would look at that and be like, no, that's there's nothing clever about that. It's super basic. So I think it's a subjective question for sure. But I don't know. That's a fucking hard question. I hate you for giving me that.
I'll give my 2 cents as well. Um, I think to me, there's a sense of smart being just witty and a bit like smart is more for the moment, why good is something. I think that you can't stress too much how the longevity is important in the tattoo world. And I think that the reason why we keep going to skulls, we keep going to flowers and very sort of universal symbols like that is also because of the fact that we need to produce things that will remain relevant for decades, for a lifetime. And anyway, and I think that you can be very conservative and then very basic with it, of course. But I think that to me, smart is something that will just be, that is more likely to be for the moment, while good is something that will withstand time. I would say that beyond that, I mean, I think time is very important, and I think that you could, what makes a good what makes the quality of a tattoo is a whole range, is a whole spectrum of things, from placement to subject matter to the how it sort of works with the person, how it expresses their thought versus your style as an artist, but also it needs to fit in your vision to be part of your process, beyond just the individual project, etc. So I think that a real good tattoo is the one that gets the the farthest by ticking all those boxes, whereas smart is probably also tends to tick less of these boxes. But I wouldn't necessarily say there's a hard limit between the two, but I think the fact that smart is probably, you tick half of the boxes that make a good tattoo, and I'd say there's probably 20 criteria that I can tell like that, of what makes the quality of a tattoo. And I'd say if you tick half of those criteria, then you're probably smart. And then it's probably a smart tattoo. And if you tick like, 15 and more, then it's probably a good tattoo. That would be my 2 cents on that.
I think you've answered that way more eloquently than me, so fair play.
Oh yeah, well. Yeah, been answering those questions for much longer as well.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
still trying to teach you some stuff. Uh, um, what any other questions? Let me see. Um, uh, People asking how they can get an apprenticeship. You can't. Um, let me. I'll still say something about that, but age cap, materials, greetings. How do you deal with the aging of the tattoos when you work with lines? That's quite interesting. It's a bit technical. That might be more for a more seasoned, for someone who's so the question. So there's a question that's a bit technical here. Greetings. I like to ask you guys, as a tattoo artist who works with lines, how do you deal with the aging of the tattoos you performed? Um, I think what that person is asking is uh, um, is how do you how do you ensure that line work based designs age well?
That's impossible for me to answer.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I mean, you probably got a very clear kind of
Yeah, I
answer.
have this would be okay. So I'm happy to talk about that, but it's not. I mean, I can get quite technical about it because there's a lot of things that come into play there. I would say maybe we could keep this question for another time, and maybe I'll do a more like you know Q&A kind of format where I'll just answer questions. Maybe you can keep this and ask again another time. But that's a very interesting question, a bit technical. Um, Now, there's a question that I find interesting. Is it hard to be a blackwork tattooer? Because I experience most people want normal stuff. So I guess what that person is trying to ask is if if sort of quote unquote black work is too niche and it's difficult to make a living off it. uh I'm gonna say very quickly, I think that it isn't anymore. And as far as I'm concerned, the reason why I gravitated towards black work is in because it resonated with me. um it resonated with my upbringing in the middle of Europe, and seeing a lot of medieval things around me. And I think, and so the reason why I'm saying this is I think that black work, in fact, speaks to more people. Ironically, actually, I think that black work speaks to more people as a sort of mainstream thing. I even sometimes, in some ways, it's traditional. It's traditional iconography. It's not just traditional within tattooing. But I think that in fact it speaks to a lot of people because it is the iconographic legacy in Europe in particular, and it's much more universal culturally than sailor tattoos or prison tattoos, which doesn't mean that in relation to the tattoo world and the clientele of tattooing maybe 20 years ago, maybe prison tattoos or sailor tattoos would have been much more representative of who were the people involved in the tattoo industry back then. But I think today, as tattooing is growing, that these kinds of references are in fact much more present and universal, omnipresent within the sort of average tattoo clientele. So that is my point of view. Mouse, how do you feel generally, um, in terms of the demand that you're getting, and do you think that you're making it harder on yourself by being gravitating towards that kind of those kinds of styles?
No, not really. I think especially in London as well. I
Yes.
think it's one of those cities where this style is very, very popular and very prominent. And I think again, it's purely down to what you're saying in that the language associated to kind of this illustrative style and the references that we draw upon are so much more universal. I think especially around where I live, I grew up around like big castles and fucking churches and stuff, and I
Mhm.
think you know, the people that grow up around that stuff see these kind of tattoos with this kind of iconography, and they immediately connect with that way more so than like prison stuff or sailor tattoos and things, which are, you know, which are cool as fuck. But I think as a whole, especially in London, no, I think, you know, this whole like blackwork style is really popular for the reasons that you said. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if there's any more questions. Yeah, so the apprenticeship, I mean, obviously we get, you know, questions about, you know, people asking, you know, on a regular basis, and you will get that now. So the day or another, people come up to you like, can I apprentice with you? Or people asking about apprenticing at Sang Bleu. I think that you can't ask that question in a live chat on Instagram. Like there's no answer for you. Maybe there is. Maybe yeah. Like maybe, you know, maybe I or another artist wants to take you as an apprentice. Before I've met you, before I've, you know, that I can't tell you. It's a one-on-one. Like the commitment of taking an apprentice is like, it's like a love relationship. It's the you know, the time that you will spend with someone teaching them that thing is precious. It's something that, you know, you'll take hours of your life to do that, and that person will make the same kind of commitment. You know, I choose very carefully whoever like I do that with. There's no formula, there's nothing. And you know, and like, and I think, you know, that applies to anyone who takes apprentices. So you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, apprenticing at Sang Bleu or with me or with Mouse, you know, then, you know, you can't answer that on a, you know, by Instagram. If you're asking on Instagram, that already means that, you know, you're getting a bit wrong, like the process behind that. But yeah, like, just go. If you want to learn the tattoo, just, you know, go get tattooed first. That's for sure. And then, you know, see, you want to vibe with the person, you know, vibe with an artist, get close to that person. And then oh, fuck off, man. No. Um, yeah, well, yeah, I did, and I regretted it bitterly. I'm joking. Yeah, well, you know, sometimes you just, you know, sometimes there's affinities that you have for people, and so I'm just replying to Marty, but like, I think that that's very much, you know, what I'm saying. Like, it's about a person, it's about an encounter, it's about someone that you connect with on some levels, and then, you know, it doesn't always pan out, or it pans out in different ways. And I think there's a beauty. And even the most failed, like I sometimes I remember, like, I've had a couple people, you know, who came once. We had a guy who came maybe for 6 months to apprentice, who dropped, like, guy in his mid-30s, maybe late 30s even. I don't remember his name, but he came maybe for 6 months, maybe a little less. He was with us, sort of apprenticing, and I was like, man, you know, that's crazy. I mean, it's a shame that he didn't pursue. I mean, well, it's not a shame. It's probably just natural selection. But I think, you know, I think it was great. It was a nice nice experience to have someone like that join the team, even for, you know, even for 6 months and dropping out. So yeah, that's my answer about this. What do you think, Mouse? What kind of advice would you give to someone who's looking for an apprenticeship today?
Kind of the normal stuff you always hear, which is, I think, frustrating for people that want apprenticeships. But we're in this age of being able to communicate with people and find people, and but at the same time, like, going up and saying hello to someone in a shop and is far more valuable, I think. And as you say, it's about an encounter. I feel like if you want to be you want to be a tattooer and you want to get an apprenticeship, just go and get tattooed, and go and try and meet people. And if you can't ask them in person for whatever reason, you know, it was difficult for me to ask Frank for an apprenticeship in person for obvious reasons, because he was either on tour or he was, you know, tattooing very rarely. But you know, if you can't do that, then message them, but make every effort you can to go and see them and show that you're keen. Like, even if it means, like, I think going and asking for an apprenticeship once a month or once a week, like, it will make you seem like an absolute arse and a real nag. But if you can show that level of commitment and keen in real life, then you're off to a good start.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think we're gonna leave it. I think I have to feed the kids now, or like do some home, some that stuff.
Homework, yeah, nice.
Man, it was great. I enjoyed that very much, and
I enjoyed this a lot. Yes.
yeah, yeah. We're looking forward to seeing you in the real world soon. Hopefully, you can find
Post-lockdown.
it. But yeah,
Sweet. All right, I hope you
that's
keep
cool, man.
busy. Thank you, man. I'll see you soon.
Talk to you very soon. All right,
Bye.
bye, man. Bye.